Here's Secretary Mineta, one of the chief whistleblowers of what really happened on 9/11. I hope you've got your critical thinking hat on, students, as we read the testimony of Norman Mineta, who was, at the time, the Secretary of Transportation in the Bush-Cheney administration. Here's an honest man. During the time that the airplane was coming into the Pentagon, he later confirmed this is the case. This is the plane that was coming into the Pentagon.
Actually, it was Bob Franken with an eyewitness who said it appeared that that Boeing 757, the American Airlines jet, landed short of the Pentagon. Can you give us any better idea of how much of the plane actually impacted the building?
You know, it might have appeared that way, but from my close-up inspection, there's no evidence of a plane having crashed anywhere near the Pentagon. The only site is the actual site of the building that's crashed in, and as I said, the only pieces left that you can see are small enough that you could pick up in your hand. There are no large tail sections, wing sections, a fuselage, nothing like that anywhere around, which would indicate that the entire plane crashed into the side of the Pentagon and then caused the side to collapse. Now, even though if you look at the pictures of the Pentagon, you see that the floors have all collapsed, that didn't happen immediately. It wasn't until almost about 45 minutes later that the structure was weakened.
During the time that the airplane was coming into the Pentagon, he later confirmed this is the case. This is the plane that was coming into the Pentagon, and they are tracking it. People there tracking it. There was a young man who had come in and say to the Vice President, Cheney, the plane is 50 miles out, plenty of time to scramble jets and intercept and try to get that plane to land safely. Plenty of time. Then the plane is 30 miles out. Now we're getting down to the last chance. When it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, the young man also said to the vice president, now, here's a young man that has some courage, right? He's challenging Dick Cheney to do something, right? I'd like to know who this young man is. He should testify about what happened and these orders. Because nothing was done. So these were obviously not orders to shoot the plane down because it wasn't shot down. It wasn't even met in the normal interception protocol. Mr. Vice President, do the orders still stand? And the Vice President turned around and whipped his neck around and said, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary? Approximately 2.5 minutes later,
The thing I find so funny about that story is, supposedly the young officer goes back to the radar room and gets the new update where the plane is and comes and asks Cheney again and goes back to the radar room and asks Cheney again. Like, how fast can that kid run?
Exactly. And it just sounds like a stage performance in conjunction with the implementation of a truth movement devised especially for those who are skeptical of the government's version of the event.
But all of these little, Easter eggs, I call them, it's like laying out Easter eggs for a 3-year-old's Easter egg hunt. They're right out there in the wide open just waiting to be found.
Exactly. And that's what the 9/11 truth movement is that the government planted all of these little Easter eggs, as you call them, and just waited for people to discover them and then put together and create a truth movement based on all of these things that the government released.
Right, but still, it doesn't get back to the evidence, and
No.
It's all sorts of bait to take people away from the evidence.
Exactly.
One of the things to add on to that, which I put in the presentation I put together, was that the specific person that you mentioned there, Norman Mineta, who was the Transport Secretary, was the only official transfer between the Clinton and the Bush administrations. And he used to be a vice president of Lockheed Martin, who are one of the companies that do research into directed energy weapon systems and technologies. And that's on that's on the State Department's website because they've got a little biography of him because I checked it out.
I personally believe that we were told on the day of 9/11, we were told what they wanted us to believe. They wanted us to believe in controlled demolition. It was announced, the thought was planted, and usually the first thing that people hear about an event is the one that they're going to remember. They're not going to remember, anything after that.
Yes, first impressions stick.
Yes.
And on the afternoon of 9/11, Van Romero from New Mexico Tech spoke out in some interview he did, saying that, obviously that was controlled demolition. I could just tell. Just take a few bombs to do it. And then 5 days later, as the story goes, 5 days later he retracted it, and then he got $80 million in grant money from the government. And so then the truthers say, that's proof he got paid off. But it turns out that a year before 9/11, he taught a short course at the Directed Energy Professional Society in energy weapons.
Oh.
He knew what he was looking at. Well, like also the first time that Stephen Jones went on Tucker Carlson's show, first of all, how did he, how was he chosen to do that? But anyway, he was on there, and this big deal was made about how they wouldn't play his video of Building 7, so therefore it's important.
Huh.
And it was sold to us. It's sort of, kind of a negative, a reverse psychology type thing, like force feeding a dog. People want what they can't have. So it brought greater interest to it.
I think what becomes difficult to comprehend, I mean, one of the problems is that the cover-up is so enormous, and when you say things, for example, like, you look at a similar comment with Larry Silverstein and the Pullet, the Pullet comment, and to think that he would have made that comment to, stir up people in the truth movement, that doesn't make a lot of sense to people. They just can't believe that you would actually, in other words, you would actually engineer the cover-up to take in the people who are already questioning the official story. They don't see the second and third and fourth layer of this. It's just beyond, the sort of level of comprehension.
So of course he was part of it because he said just exactly the right words, and then everybody thought, see, pull it means controlled demolition.
It's so ridiculous. Do firefighters go around with sticks of dynamite in their back pocket to, just in case, to check in there? It makes no sense. You have to study a building for months in advance to see where to put the explosives and so forth. And if the building is half burned, you would have no idea how to assess how the thing is going to fall, because you wouldn't, unless you could assess the damage.
And then you got people like Alex Jones promoting that clip, and I was taken in by it as well, so I can speak from direct experience, because I believe, as I've said many times when I've done talks like this with folks, I was taken in by the bomb story. When I started to look at stuff, I didn't believe the official story, but I was taken in probably for at least 2 years by the bomb story, and it took me quite a long time to kind of cure myself of that, I suppose, one way of putting it.
Did you know a third tower fell on 9/11? At approximately 5:20 p.m. on September 11, 2001, World Trade Center Building 7 collapsed in 6.5 seconds due to normal office fires, according to the government reports.
World Trade Center 7 collapsed because of fires fueled by office furnishings. It did not collapse from explosives or from fuel oil fires.
In 2008, the government admitted that World Trade Center 7 collapsed at freefall for over 100 feet. This admission brings with it some serious implications that have yet to be addressed. If this sounds a bit odd to you, you're not alone. Polls show that 30% of U.S. citizens still have questions about the official 9/11 hypothesis. Rethink 9/11 is a rapidly growing coalition of more than 50 organizations from around the world, including well-respected organizations of scientists, technical experts, peace activists, religious persons, veterans, and surviving family members of 9/11 victims. All of these groups are coming together in an unprecedented global outreach campaign, in a collective commitment to raise worldwide awareness and support for a transparent and independent investigation into the destruction of all 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers on 9/11. A comprehensive investigation is needed to address irrefutable scientific facts and evidence which simply cannot be ignored. Here's Rethink 9/11's ad that will be seen around the world. Throughout the month of September, you'll see Rethink 9/11 on subways, billboards, and sides of buses, on bumper stickers, t-shirts, lawn signs, and freeway overpasses, on library bulletin boards, on storefronts, and all over Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Rethink 9/11 is ready to facilitate renewed and growing interest in this highly relevant issue by drawing attention to that lesser-known third tower, a 47-story skyscraper, which was not hit by an airplane but collapsed completely from top to bottom on 9/11. World Trade Center Building 7 has been a starting point for many and will be the initial focal point of Rethink 9/11's campaign, to be followed by additional significant facts and points of evidence regarding the total destruction of all 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers on 9/11. The campaign will empower people worldwide in a way that allows each and every person to participate at any level.
We strongly support the Rethink 9/11 initiative because we are opposed to crime.
And because we believe that our civilization is doomed unless we confront the unanswered questions of 9/11.
Rethink 9/11!
Together, we can, at last, bring widespread public attention to this vital issue. It's simple. Go to rethink911.org right now and donate to your city. Share this ambitious campaign with everyone you know, and together, let's change the course of history. Remembering 9/11 is not enough. Rethink911.org. The evidence might surprise you.
Makes it 0.6 on the Richter scale. That's like a jackhammer. It should have sounded like it was raining dump trucks. You know, big dump trucks go down the road, they wake you up at night because they vibrate the ground.
Now is going up to get medical supplies, to bring down trauma physicians down here, to set up the surgical unit and the triage unit down here, in addition to, if anybody out there can help, any vendors who have food or supplies. The firemen have no food, nothing but snacks. They need fluids, they need water, and they need protein foods. This is just the beginning of what they're facing. And we need masks. We need TB masks. Holy shit! What is it?
Just went down.
What just went down?
World Trade 7.
It did go down before.
No, 7. Number 7.
Oh my God!
The NIST team found no evidence that explosives were involved in the collapse.
And our analysis showed that even the smallest explosive charge that was capable of bringing down the critical column in the building, had it occurred, we would have seen sound levels of 120 to 130 decibels about a half a mile away. That would have been an incredibly loud sound, and that sound was not picked up by any of the videos or witnesses that we have talked to.
The second building collapsed. He came back 20 minutes later, looking like a Three Stooges movie covered in plastic, I swear to God. But he got a good shape, man. Just a good shape. Then we went back there. Whoa, 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 whoa!
If you notice down here, you see this cluster of something happening. That's from the Fox Islands, which is part of the Aleutian Islands. They had a little earthquake up there. But there's a equivalent of 0.6 on the Richter scale for Building 7, which is this little line here. It was a non-seismic event. Building 7 went away and didn't make a seismic event that you could register on this chart. Maybe because controlled demolitions don't register? Well, here's a controlled demolition, the Seattle King Dome. March 26, 2000. The P wave arrives at the seismic station and the S wave arrives at the seismic station. See how closely spaced that signal is. It takes 4 seconds to drop a bowling ball off the roof of the King Dome, just to give you relative size. Yet the ground shook for at least 9 seconds in the major part, so at least twice as long instead of less. Here are other signals. There are 5 different recording stations for Building 7. None of them could see an S wave or a P wave. They calculated when it should have arrived. But you can't see anything out of background noise in any of those. And actually, one of those stations, they couldn't even find a surface wave arriving. But you can see ones like this one here, where, again, the 6.4 is the time it takes to drop a bowling ball off the roof. The surface wave lasted for less time. So what's going on here? No S wave, no P wave. Those 2 waves travel through the earth. This didn't slam to the ground. No big building slammed to the ground. Well, let's look at the possibilities. Tower 2 was the first tower to go away. If you turned all but the bottom 16 stories to dust and just dropped a 16-story building to the ground, it would make the seismic signal approximately that was recorded, which was a 2.1. Do the same thing for Tower 1. Dustify all but the bottom 20 stories, and you get the seismic signal that was recorded. And Building 7, if you turn all but the bottom 2.5 stories to dust, it would make the seismic signal approximately the same as what was recorded. This is compared to the Seattle King Dome. The Seattle King Dome was really just this concrete ring, and it made a 2.3. This was in Baker's Trust, which was across the street from Tower 2. That's pretty weird. How do you get it to bend like that or wrinkle up? Looks like a curling ribbon. If you get a beam to buckle, that's one mode. Here's another mode. It sure doesn't do that. Now, they cleaned it up, repaired it all, replaced the beams. After they got it repaired, deconstruction begins. Why did they repair a building? To take it apart? they decided to do that right after they did some dust studies. And when they took it apart down to the level where it was very damaged, look at these beams. They look like they've been at the bottom of the ocean for 100 years.
I mean, how do you get fires to cause a 47-story building to come straight down onto its footprint?
Here's another similar story that I don't think has been said publicly before, that I've mentioned many times about the 9/11 Commission report. Due to the Smith-Mundt Act, at least as of now, it hasn't quite been reversed yet, but that government officials cannot put propaganda on the U.S. citizens, nor can they put it into a government report. They can omit stuff, they can misinterpret stuff, but they can't put in actual false information. So the government's report, of 9/11 Commission report, omitted various things that were, I call them Easter eggs, as in Easter eggs laying out there for a 3-year-old to find. The 3-year-old thinks he's really found something, but they're laying right there, out there in the wide open to be found. Well, some of these, like, Larry Silverstein's Pullet, Norman Minetta's 50 miles out, 30 miles out, the orders still stand. You can go down this long laundry list of these, put options, stand on orders, all the steel shipped to China. And all of these various things were omitted from the 9/11 Commission report. And then we have, essentially, the 9/11 Commission report, Part 2, Dave Ray Griffin's book, Omissions and Distortions from the 9/11 Commission report. So he published all of these things that supposedly were left out. Well, they could not be included in a government document because they are PSYOPs. And the government is forbidden from doing PSYOPs in an official report because that's essentially would be the government attacking itself with the PSYOPs.
I think that a lot of times people will challenge you, and one of the first things that you say, and justifiably so, is, have you read my book? Because, well, quite frankly, there are 500 plus pages wherein you explain just everything. You've got all the seismic graphs, you've got all kinds of information in there. And so when people approach you and challenge you, what else would you say? Good heavens. Okay, could you talk to us just a bit about the legal suit that you brought regarding 9/11, and you are the only person that has done this?
With respect to the buildings and the report of the buildings, what I did was begin with what it was that happened on 9/11 to the buildings. And you have to begin with what it was, because if you start with anything else, you're assuming what it was. You're solving an imaginary problem, not a real problem. Bombs did it. What was it that bombs did? Well, let's see. What would it look like if bombs had blown up? And so that's what people end up, thinking. They imagine the problem after that. So you have to start with what actually happened. And you can't sue a government agency, but you can sue contractors of a government agency for fraud. And the contractors on the NIST report knowingly submitted fraudulent information and signed off on a report they knew was wrong. That's fraud. For example, Underwriters Lab did 2 half-scale and 2 full-scale mock-ups of a floor, set it on fire, twice the temperature, twice as long, and none of the times did it fail to support load, so they called the test. Yet they signed off on a report saying that fire did it. That's fraud.
Now, who are some of the companies that worked with NIST?
Well, there's 23 on the list. The biggest ones, the one that had the most number of people on board was, the 2 top ones, Applied Research Associates and SAIC, Science Applications International Corp. Those are also known as part of the military-industrial complex. And in particular, ARA, Applied Research Associates, are developers and manufacturers of energy weapons. And they were responsible for doing the, modeling of what happened to buildings. Well, they didn't actually analyze what happened to buildings. They made up an imaginary scenario. They didn't evaluate what happened. They have, 10,000 pages of, where this bolt was purchased from, who ordered what steel from where, and, all those details. And they did some, neat graphics and all, but they just assumed what happened and then modeled their assumption, their hypothetical scenario. And that's fraud.
Exactly.
And so, under the law, I need to show that I was the first. I'm still the only one to bring this up, and also that fraud was committed. Well, NIST even admitted to me that there was fraud. They admitted that they didn't evaluate what happened to buildings, yet they were mandated by Congress to determine why and how the towers, quote, collapsed. Well, if they'd analyzed it, they would see that the towers didn't collapse. They turned to dust in midair.
Right.
Most of them did. So if this had gone to court, so I obviously qualify, but the judge in the lower court dismissed it, saying, well, he's not going to hear a case about who shot JFK or what landed on the moon. Wonder if he read the case. That isn't what my case was about. And so we appealed it to the Court of Appeals, and those judges were respectful, and they, in the footnotes, even acknowledged that they were ignoring the law to dismiss the case. If this case had gone forward, think of that scenario. If this case had gone forward, I get to put people under oath. Now, imagine if you put those people, ARA and SAIC under oath. And, ARA in particular, they have, currently I think they still have, and they had at the time, a contract with the U.S. government to know everything about any weapon of mass destruction that is being developed or has been developed anywhere. So not only could they recognize what technology that was used, they would know whose technology it was. Wouldn't it be nice to put them under oath?
Indeed.
If this case had gone forward, that's what would happen. So I kind of think that has to do with why they dismissed it. But the judges were respectful. They didn't laugh the case off. They just, they were ignoring the law to dismiss the case.
What did they say to you regarding?
I don't want to get into that. If it was
okay, that's okay.
Yeah,
all right.
You had to be in the courtroom to hear it. If there's, I guess, other people who were. The room was packed. Actually, you could hear a pin drop. Even the whatever you call him, the sergeant at arms or whatever the guy in uniform. Because this is just a few blocks away from the World Trade Center. But we only had 8 minutes total.
Oh, that long?
Uh-huh. And the other side was busy doing all sorts of ad hominems. That's what they spent the whole time doing. So do you address the ad hominems or do you talk about the evidence? Ms. Wood and little Ms. Wood and the Dr. So-and-so from NIST. They played that game.
Sure.
And they also brought up space beams and airplanes, no airplanes. Well, that has nothing to do with what I submitted. I submitted evidence, but something my lawyer explained to me that he learned in law school. When the law's on your side, you talk about the law. When the facts are on your side, you talk about the facts. When neither the law nor the facts are on your side, you talk about something else, anything else.
Sure. Sure.
And you find that also going on with, we'll probably see some good examples today.
Sure.
Callers, they talk about this, that, and the other. You didn't specify what the operator of the technology had for breakfast, so you have nothing. Things
Sure.
like that.
Sure.
But this, by the way, I wanted to mention this fascination people have with debunking. When somebody is focused on debunking, it tells me that they have no interest in letting the truth come out. Because if they had interest in the truth, that's what they would be pursuing rather than
Sure.
debunking.
Sure. Absolutely.
Everyone, whether they're for or against the president, the war, 9/11, whatever, everything is so emotional, and with all the knowledge out there, we have seemed to have abandoned logic and reason. Do you see that as a trend? And if so, then what in the world can we do to change it? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. That's an excellent question, and that's spot on correct. It's the biggest problem we encounter. I mean, we are a Skeptic Society as a science organization, and the whole problem of critical thinking is huge in this country. People are swept up by emotions, particularly when it comes to religion and politics. People are emotionally invested in their positions and beliefs, people on the left and the right, Christians, Jews, Muslims, everybody are committed to their positions. That makes it very difficult to think critically and clearly about evidence. I think what happens is these things get usually through some alternative media, and thanks to the internet, it fuels these things. I mean, look, we have to be in favor of free speech. The internet's the greatest thing since the printing press, but we also have to put up with the fact that goofy stuff is going to get printed as well and passed down as fact. So I watched.
So when you do the science, this guy that that says he's a physics professor and doesn't come up with this basic stuff that I learned as a hobby doing ballistics when I was 12 years old, can't understand why the building came down with the force of gravity. This is really absurd. As far as
Thank you.
Right? I mean, it's nuts. And
Yes.
and I watched that film. It was insensitive to the people that suffered. It was horrible. No, this kind of a person does not need to be teaching children about science
Yes.
when he doesn't even apply it himself.
Talking about Stephen Jones?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Shermer.
Yeah, I mean, his point is well made that the demolition experts that have published on why the buildings collapsed point out that if it were a controlled demolition, when they bring a building down, they bring it down from the bottom up, and if you look at the videotape, you'll see the building collapses. Right at the point of impact. There are no explosions below that. There are no squibs going off, and then it goes down. It goes down right at that point where the plane hit, which is exactly what you'd expect. And as the caller said, all that huge amount of weight above it cascades down, and the floors collapse one after another at real-time speed.
But then the strangest thing happened. This beam of sunlight came right in on us, like about 8 inches long, but it was clearly sunlight. It was all dirty and full of debris, and it looked like pepper was floating around in it, sort of. But it was sunlight, and I'm like amazed now. It's a 110-story building above us, and I'm looking up at the sun.
According to Pasquale, his fall ended here, at the top of what was left of Stairway B.
I didn't feel anything. My body was totally numb. I mean, I felt nothing at all. I just opened up my eyes and saw blue sky.
And the whole problem of critical thinking is huge in this country. People are swept up by emotions. And as the caller said, all that huge amount of weight above it cascades down, and the floors collapse one after another at real-time speed.
Michael Shermer is our guest. He's the publisher of Skeptic magazine. By the way, how do people get that?
Oh, people can get Skeptic. Well, it's carried at all Barnes & Noble and Borders and Books A Million. All bookstores carry Skeptic, or of course you can just go to skeptic.com and order it there. It's a science magazine, but we also deal a lot with these kinds of fringe issues, politically loaded, religiously loaded controversies, all related to science and conspiracies. After the fact, we look for anomalies and then try to fit them into a conspiracy theory. Here's what happens in general, is that no theory of anything explains all the facts. In science, this is called the residue problem. There's always a residue of unexplained anomalies that the primary theory that everyone accepts can't explain. What people do on the fringes is they take those anomalies and they try to construct a whole new theory, but the new theory doesn't explain all the old facts that the old theory explains just fine. So there's sort of a principle of parsimony here. That the most salient theory that explains the most facts is the one we should accept, even if there are still some unsolved mysteries, which is perfectly okay. We have to have a certain tolerance for ambiguity. We can't explain everything. But the fact is that, for example, Al-Qaeda and Osama said that they did it. They already
sounded like a plane crash.
It's basically a filter, this peer review process, so that you have all sorts of good ideas and nonsense hitting this peer review filter. What gets through and is published in established journals is considered to be serious and worth looking at.
Now, the Center for Research Applied Chronology. This was a mock paper, wasn't it? Sent in.
The crap paper.
Yeah. This was submitted by some students. Just tell us a little bit about that. That was to show up the.
No, were they students at Cornell? I forgot exactly where they were. There was a whole lot of hoopla being made out of these new open access journals online that were supposed to be peer reviewed, and they wanted to test the peer review process. So they had a computer program that just put out gibberish, but nicely formatted. It kind of looked like a legitimate paper, but it was just nonsense.
The Bentham Journal, I think it was submitted to.
The Bentham Open Journal, and it was accepted as long as they paid the $800 fee. And then they said, "Well, we withdraw." It passed peer review. Obviously, no one had read it because it was just gibberish.
Yeah, and I understand that this is the same. The Bentham Open Journal are the ones who peer reviewed the thermite.
Right. It wasn't the exact same one, but it's owned and run by the same outfit. They have a bunch of different ones.
Right. Okay.
It's in Saudi Arabia or someplace like that. I forgot exactly where it is. When I was being accused of being a government shill or a plant and promoting disinformation, one of the things that shelters me or saves me from that's verifiable is that in my RFC, that's the request for corrections to NIST, I stated what I talk about. Energy weapons, and this, the building was justified and so forth. And if I was a government shill, I'm forbidden from putting that in a government report because that would be treason. I could be charged with treason. Now, at the same time, let's look at the thermite story. Their RFC, which came about a month after mine, did not contain any mention of their so-called thermite evidence or molten metal. And, why would they go to the trouble of filing a request for correction to NIST and not include their claim to fame of thermite? With the Smith-Mundt Act, it really, it defends me and it incriminates others.
Yes.
But, that's why I think they're trying to take it off the books. And it also led me to, when Morgan Reynolds told me that they were working at putting it through Congress to take it off the books or to render it useless, that you kind of wonder, where things are going. But then someone posted somewhere that, I guess that's why Fetzer and Gage each had their, quote, hearings just outside the country line in Canada. Toronto and Vancouver.
My gosh.
They could do their propaganda in Vancouver.
Is that why they're having the conference in Vancouver?
That's what it seems like. And when somebody posted that, Fetzer posted right after that with one of his distracting rants, just totally ignoring that, trying to detract it. Well, I've had Judy on my show X number of times. I gave her unprecedented this. His normal spiel he does.
Sure. Huh.
There's some elements within that have aspects of a cult. The Judy Wood phenomenon is of that character, Richie, where it's not really a scientific movement so much as it has the characteristics of a cult.
Yeah, but Judy is a scientist, and I know you had a disagreement with Judy some years ago, and she argues that when we look at the towers coming down, when we see those old videos of them, that it almost looks like they're disappearing in front of our eyes. And she talks about energy weapons and stuff like that. Look, to me, I'm just a journalist. I'm interested in everybody's opinion. And you know, Jim, I've invited NIST and I've invited Popular Mechanics on my shows over the years, and it doesn't matter how much I advance and how much more listeners and viewers I get, they still don't want to come on, which is a shame.
Richie, it's not a question of whether you have the degrees. Judy Wood has the degrees. It's whether you're being scientific by responding to the evidence. We have discovered in the U.S. Geological Survey dust samples, barium and strontium, lithium, lanthanum, yttrium, uranium, tritium, elements that would not be present were it not a nuclear event.
It's said that, quite a few different people actually say this and repeat it and repeat it. There's no evidence to that. They say, oh, she totally ignores the dust analysis. She totally ignores the tritium values. She totally ignores, well, it's in my book. Mm. And that's what I presented at the energy conference, and that was really got people upset.
Right, and I think this is some people are trying to create illusions, saying you don't reference the evidence. This is all part of the information management process.
And the evidence that I presented, for example, the tritium that was found, it shows that it's not at all the level that you'd find like in leaky nuclear plants, but it is along the same in the same range you would expect for something like cold fusion, or what has been termed cold fusion.
It appears to have involved a very sophisticated arrangement of mini or micro nukes that were sequenced to bring down the building the buildings from the top down, blowing, for example, 1 cube at 10 floors at a time. That would yield for the North Tower 11 seconds. That corresponds to NIST's estimate, or in the case of the South, because the top 3 were tilting to the side, 9 seconds. Again, agreement with NIST.
But nukes, Jim, because that's the first I've heard of this. But nukes would lead me to think that there would have been much more damage done to surrounding buildings. No, Richie. That's because you don't know much about them. I mean, that's deliberate. These are mini or micro. They can have a radius of destruction dialed to, for example, 100 feet. Those buildings were 208 feet on a side. If you had them in the core columns, for example, with a destruction radius of 100 feet, then you're pretty much accomplishing what we saw on 9/11.
Remember, Richie, those buildings are blowing apart from the top down. They're being converted into millions of cubic yards of very fine dust, and when it's over, there's nothing left. There's no pile of debris. None.
We're being made into a culture of lies, a people of lies, a country of lies, a nation of lies. And lying kills you. It's a disease. It's very infectious. It's not only infectious, but it's corrosive. And when, in the truth movement, what we see is lies being generated and stirred up, and then regenerated and re-stirred up. And finally, what will happen to a culture that's built on lies? They will be completely without any strength whatsoever, won't they?
Ironically, and I think Andrew could probably recall the phrase, something that Gerard Holmgren used to get revved up about. They call it. He said they should call the group something like Liars for Truth.
Yeah.
It's okay.
We just coming up with, because we've got all these 9/11 Truth groups. You got firefighters for 9/11 Truth, pilots for 9/11 Truth. And we've got architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, and scientists for 9/11 Truth, lawyers for 9/11 Truth. That's another one. So it's from lawyers to 9/11 Truth to liars for 9/11 Truth. It's not a big leap, is it? So, we kind of come to these conversations when we're feeling a bit down, and we have to kind of cheer ourselves up a bit in some very twisted way.
It's like there's a different flavored fishing lure out there for every profession. Is actors for 9/11 Truth, musicians for 9/11 Truth, medical professionals for 9/11 Truth, XXX for 9/11 Truth, whatever. What is the difference? This is a different fishing lure.
Right, and it's back to that herd mentality. This group of people will follow the leader, and this other group of people, like the architects, they will follow Gage, and then there's another group of people who are going to follow Fetzer, Uncle Fetzer, I believe is what people call him now.
Uncle Fester?
Uncle Fetzer.
But the engineers who look at architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, I mean, I have known some who look at it and realize it's bogus, and they go back to the official story or just throw their hands up and say, well, that's bogus, so I'm not, there's no validity to those questioning 9/11.
So has anybody ever looked at these groups and looked at the individuals that are in the groups and looking at who they are and what they really believe? I mean, who knows? Is it a group of 5? Is it a group of 500? What does the group consist of? Gage
lists them all, but the majority of them, if they won't get in lockstep, they get tossed out of the group. If they're docile and just lend their name to the list, that's the kind that Gage has. As though putting their name on Gage's list will solve 9/11, will get it accomplished. It's sort of like they're just, voting, for let's do something about 9/11. That's the extent of it. What I like to point out is, they want a new investigation. Well, read my book. There you go.
Yes.
If they're calling for a new investigation, what they're doing is admitting that they are not capable of conducting an investigation.
How true. Or if they're government agents, they couldn't possibly conduct an investigation.
An independent one, yeah.
Yes.